Howdy, everyone. Welcome back to Dangerous Thoughts on Unsafe Space. I'm your host, Carter Laren, and I'm back. Sorry I missed last week. I think many of you know why. Don't forget, the subscribe button here on Unsafe Space is mandatory. In fact, if you haven't gotten your second jab of the subscribe button, you should go do that now. You can watch us at unsafespace.com, not just on YouTube, so we're always streaming there live, so go check that out. Also, we should be on Utreon and Odyssey. So if you want to go check out those new platforms, you can do that. Thanks again to everyone who is already subscribed. And a special thanks to all the paid subscribers who support our show. We couldn't do this without you guys. So I appreciate that. You can always go to unsafespace.com to buy merch or be a paid subscriber or whatever else. Just contact us and say you hate us if you want. You can do whatever you want there. Also, I would like to thank everyone for the kind words and congratulations and all that stuff from the community. I really do appreciate it. Tonight, we're going to do a little different show format than normally. I normally do solo, but I did want less prep, but I wanted to do this anyway. It just happens to be less prep, so it works. I'm killing two birds with one stone. So normally when I do these solo Dangerous Thoughts episodes, I have a definition every week. We put it into the concept hierarchy. We talk about something being, it's in this category and it's differentiated by blankety blank. And we do that. And then we dive into a particular subject related to practical philosophy, by which I mean philosophy for actually living on Earth, not getting high with your philosophy professors. But from time to time, I would like to have guests on to help me explore topics. And that's what we're going to do tonight. So tonight's guest, before I bring her on, let me just tell you about her. She's Nicki Clyne. We've had her on before. Originally, I think we had her on a deprogrammed episode to talk about her involvement in Nixium, but she's best known for her role as Callie on the reboot of Battlestar Galactica, which was good. If you haven't seen it, you should watch it. But more importantly, I've come to know her over the past few months as a really solid thinker. And frankly, she's become a friend. This is not an interview. This is not me interviewing Nikki. If you want an interview, go watch the deprogrammed episode with her. This is a discussion that we're going to have about topics that we explore on this show: critical thinking, emotional influence of things, principles, values. So I invite you guys to be a part of it. If you want to participate in chat, feel free. So without further ado, let me see if I can add Nikki. Here we go. There she is. There's Nikki Klein. Hi, Nikki.
Hi, and hello everyone watching. I'm super happy to be here and looking forward to this conversation. We always have plenty to talk about, so
we do.
It's gonna be good.
I think we have had a preview of part of this conversation, which lasted a couple hours. So
yeah, I think you're like, you want to just hop on a call for a few minutes, and 2 hours later.
Yeah. So here's how I want to kick off the discussion. I want to remind people, in the third episode I made of Dangerous Thoughts, I talked about how emotions affect judgment and decision making. I cited some research by Dr. Jennifer Lerner from Harvard, which was she did a meta study on biased emotions, appraisal tendency framework, anchoring. And so I kind of want to start. This is kind of where I want to start with you. Some things I've noticed about both our public but also our private discussions. You are reasonable, thoughtful, intelligent, rational. It doesn't mean I don't think you ever make any errors or that we agree on everything, but like, you come across as someone who's seeking the truth, using reason as your guide. You've got some demonstrated perseverance in the face of some opposition. But yet, when I see you in public often, something I've noticed in many public discussions is that a lot of people have a very, very hard time hearing you or approaching conversation with you in any sort of unbiased way. I feel like you could say 2 + 2 is 4, and people would respond like, "Look at her, she's just brainwashed." And I actually looked at some of the YouTube comments about you. I could hear in her voice that she was brainwashed, right? This lady is exactly the kind of person a cult leader looks for. So we all have a tendency maybe to bias our interaction with people based on an emotional response or some anchor that we first hear about someone. So I want to start with a simple question for you. How has your ability to effectively communicate with people changed before and after the NXIVM drama? Have you noticed a difference?
How has it changed?
Has it? Maybe it hasn't. Maybe no one ever. Maybe people always thought you were in a cult. I don't know.
No, oh, my ability right.
Yeah, like your
Well,
ability
no, I
to
was thinking more of like my level of skill.
Oh, maybe
But
it was poorly worded. I
no,
mean,
the
how was people's
reception.
reception of you?
Right.
Yes.
No, that makes sense. And hopefully I've improved as I hope that I always do, and it's certainly gotten more difficult. And I have no media training. I've never had a publicist. So when it comes to telling my story or addressing these pretty egregious misunderstandings or perceptions that are in the media, I'm just honest. Like, I answer genuinely, but that's not always the best way to do things. Like, there's a reason why people get media training. There's a reason why, you practice and kind of develop a script, if you will. And I haven't done that, mostly because I just haven't chosen to prioritize that. And I prefer forums where I'm able to have more of a conversation and hopefully allow people to get to know me better. It's a very strange and surreal experience, honestly. And I don't know that I'll ever get used to people thinking things about me that are not only untrue, but antithetical to the person that I am. And I don't know. I think the best circumstance is when I get to know someone first, and then maybe they find out, like, they put things together and they're like,
Oh,
wait,
you're
you were
that
involved in
person.
that. And then they're just confused. And then they have
Right.
to think, like, they're forced into a situation where they have to try to reconcile, buying into this narrative and then the person that I am. And some people are open to that. Other people don't want to deal with it. But when people come to me already knowing me from that story, and if anyone's watching who doesn't know what I'm talking about, I was involved with an organization called NXIVM, which the media called a sex cult. People have been charged with crimes and gone to prison, and it was a very salacious story in the media that was very much taken out of context and spun a certain way. And my story is very different. So that, and again, that's not what I'm here to talk about, but it's just kind of surreal. It's like people are interacting with a character that happens to have my likeness, and I'm kind of forced to experience the consequences of the character they've imagined. And sometimes I'm able to break through that, and sometimes I'm not. But
Is it similar at all to like when you go to like a sci-fi convention and people talk to you as if you're Callie? Is it similar?
It has similarities, but most people are very excited to talk to Callie, not
I see.
necessarily a
They
sex
like
cult member.
Callie.
They like
I
Callie,
see.
and that was really the most devastating thing for me, is that in the past, when people would recognize me, it would make their day. Like, they would just be so excited to meet me and talk to me, and I liked talking about the show. I was always really grateful and gracious with fans. So it was like a superpower. And then when the other news started coming out, it became this scarlet letter. And I didn't want people to recognize me. And if they did, it was kind of a scary thing, because there's a lot of hate behind what they think this organization was and what they did and things like that. So it's very different in that respect, but I suppose it has similarities in that they're just imagining a meaning about me based on things they've seen on TV.
Sure. Now, okay, so let's get into this a little bit. What do you think is going on? Because by the way, I don't think it. I think it probably happens to people like you a lot more, but it probably happens to all of us sometimes, and we probably
Sure.
do it to people all the like. We probably all do it sometimes, right? We have
Oh, we gossip about people.
yeah,
we vent about people, and our opinions, they affect how other people then perceive the people we're talking about. And it's hard to forget them. Like, I don't know if you've ever had someone like rant to you about someone and then you met them and you're like, oh, they're kind of like not, that doesn't really fit what I thought they would be like, but you can't erase that. And that's, I think, the most insidious thing about our media and about people who are really not mindful about how they speak about other people is they don't realize the damage it does to the integrity of the person and how they're perceived.
Yeah. So what do you think some of the, I don't want to talk about NXIVM per se, but in order to have this discussion, I think the interesting angle in here is like,
it's cool. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think is going on with people emotionally? Like, what's the feelings that they're having that are preventing them from, like, because you could have a rational conversation with you and then still disagree with you at the end of it, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like people who are just, they like close their ears and stomp their feet and yell, I'm not listening, basically. And like that's
I think they're scared. I think they're really scared. I think the narrative was very effective in preying on people's kind of deep-seated fears as well as social taboos. So things that we're not even allowed to talk about, which means that you can't even fill in information that might allay someone's fear because it's just something we don't talk about. Like, we don't question if someone says that they were abused or victimized. Like, that's not okay. It's not okay to hold a woman accountable. There are certain circumstances, but I think in this case, the victims were very, I don't know how to say it, untouchable, kind of. They're kind of untouchable in a lot of ways. And it's like, you call something a sex cult or even just a cult, that's a horrible word. And you say, like, well, define it. You know, and if I said it, people would say, oh, well, that's what someone in a cult would say. Like, you would try to pick apart.
That's actually one of the things people say about you. That's exactly what someone in a cult would say. It's like, all right.
And it's like a Gödel problem. Like, there's just there's nothing I could say, even if it was so logical. And this is a thing, when I would have conversations with some of the people who now have, really gone against the organization, they would tell me these things that they were upset about, that they thought were happening. And I would say, well, where's the proof? Like, I'm open to your side of things. Show me. And, what you're saying, I want to understand, but it needs to make sense to me. And they're like, well, there you go with your logic again. And I'm like, but logic is a legitimate thing.
That's not part of a cult. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Like, that's a legitimate request. If you're saying that people are doing terrible things, I think it's appropriate to require evidence before you act on it. And that just wasn't a thing, if anything. And I don't like to use like the same kind of methods, but I feel like their behavior is much more cult-like. Like, they couldn't be questioned. They used all kinds of like dramatic, subjective, emotional language. Whereas I just try to evaluate for myself what makes sense based on actual evidence.
You're reminding me of something that I don't think you and I talked about. When I recently read the Anarchist Handbook, which is a collection of essays from anarchists over history. And some of them were like full-on commies. Like, I'm not a communist, but they were just full-on commies. And it was a challenge for me to go into reading the essay without this like seething dismissal of everything they had to say, because I already knew that they were commies. It was like, this is an essay by a communist. And I've got a lot of like emotional responses to communism. So But what I realized was like your responsibility, if you're going to have a discussion about something, or if you're going to actually want to be taken seriously intellectually, you have a responsibility to entertain. It doesn't mean you actually think it's true, but you have a responsibility to like put disbelief aside for a second and entertain the arguments as they
Mhm.
are
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
engage with them as they are. And then
Right.
after that, if you say, oh, well, here's a hole I see and this is the problem, and yes, it is a house of cards and it falls apart and here's how, that's
Mhm.
fine. But it's dishonest to engage with it only by seeking something wrong with it without kind of stepping back and entertaining it
Mhm.
as a possibility in the world. And I think a lot of times, I don't know if people, like when they're interacting with you, I'm wondering if maybe they're, in order to interact with you about Nixium, for example, one has to be able to temporarily say, well, what if it's possible that what she's saying is completely true? What if it's
Mhm.
possible that all of this is not at all of the way it was portrayed? And you might come to the conclusion after a discussion with you that no, in fact, it was completely correctly portrayed or you portrayed and whatever.
Right.
But to have the conversation, you have to be able to suspend disbelief for a moment. You have to be able to put it out there as a possibility.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're not really engaging with people. And I see that quite a lot. I see it in any kind of religious discussion.
Mhm.
I see it in a lot of discussions about politics, and I see it in discussions with you about Nixium or anything kind of related to it, where
Yeah.
there's that kind of an attitude. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense, and that was actually exactly the other thing I was going to say of why I think it's so hard for people to even entertain the possibility that what I have to say has merit because of what it means if it's true.
Right.
What it means if it's true is that there are people who are lying and have like gained a lot of sympathy and fame. It means that our government is corrupt and could put innocent people in prison. It means that the media lies and we can't trust them. It means a lot of things that are very uncomfortable to
Yeah.
entertain. And yeah, I do think there's a lot of protection and cognitive dissonance that needs to happen in order to protect these assumptions that we, move through the world with in order to feel safe. Like,
Yeah.
if it's possible that someone could accuse me of something that I didn't do, and I could be tried in the court of public opinion and then tried in court and be convicted even though I'm innocent, and without going into all the details of what happened with Nexium, it's a very complex, nuanced case. But I do think that my perspective challenges those notions, and that's very hard for people to,
Yeah.
I get why they don't want to believe that could be so. Honestly, I don't know, because I've thought about this a lot, what I would make of it if I weren't in the position I am. Like, if I were just reading it in the news, I don't know that I would be able to give the people I read about the benefit of the doubt. So it's very humbling in that regard, and for that reason, as hard as it is, I don't blame people. Like, I understand it. But yeah, I wish more people were open, I have to say, because I think, I think I'm not the person that some people think I am, and it's unfortunate that I walk around with that um, prejudice.
But I feel like the problem is much. I mean, you're a great example. Like you can bring this problem out to the
Yeah,
surface very
no,
easily, but
yeah,
it's all over the place, right?
totally.
Um, and I think it is based on a psychological need to evade a contradiction, right?
Hmm.
So contradictions in on this show, I talk a lot about conceptual hierarchies, and like contradictions when identified are very uncomfortable, because most people are married to their view of the world, um, and a contradiction means that that view of the world is threatened. It might end up being a minor threat, but it could end up being something that really upsets the apple cart, right? And so
Yeah.
contradictions are very uncomfortable to deal with. And rather than deal with them, I think a lot of people just use emotional tools to evade those. And one emotional tool is, she's a cult member, therefore I don't have to listen to anything she says. Everything she
Right.
said, oh, she's saying 2 + 2 is 4. I don't have to listen because
Right.
she's a cult member. Like I
Right.
can push that aside and not have to deal with it. But I think I think that's one of the big issues that we have right now in our culture is that's how people have been taught. They've been taught that the genetic fallacy is a completely legitimate way to look at the world. Oh, this person is on this side, this person's on that side. No further analysis required.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's more comfortable, that's for sure. And I think our school system is set up in a way that rewards a feeling of certainty and like knowingness. And so we're kind of brought up to feel like we can know, and being put in these situations where we have to evaluate, and there's no simple answer. And maybe people that we associate with or depend on think something that we don't think, and that's also a scary thing, like to divert from the tribe. So there are a lot of emotional obstacles that a person needs to overcome to be able to let in information and actually critically evaluate it. And we're not taught or encouraged. In fact, I think we're discouraged to do that in our culture.
Absolutely we are. Yeah, absolutely.
Except for on this show, right?
Well, we try, right? I mean, I'm sure we fail sometimes, right? But yeah, we try. And I think part of it is I have talked about this before. I made a conscious decision like 20 some odd years ago. Mumble. Probably closer to 30. I made a conscious decision a long time ago. To marry the epistemological process rather than the conclusions. And I think that's unusual. I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I think it's an unusual thing, and I think it's the right thing to do. I think that especially the way that we're encouraged now, because we have a lot of tribal culture is very tribal. It's just a lot of tribal, I'll say, pressures. That you are led to identify with a set of conclusions. There's this set of conclusions, and there's this set of conclusions. And when people meet you and evaluate you, they're trying to evaluate you based on what conclusions you've drawn. That indicates what camp you're in. And I think people use that for a self-identification as well. Well, I'm someone, for example, someone might say, well, I believe in government health care and women's right to choose and affirmative action and wars in Syria. And like, that's the camp, whatever it is. Like, I'm in that camp. That's me. Those are my conclusions. And that's not how a thinking person ought to approach the world. I think a thinking person ought to approach the world is with the idea that I'm not my conclusions, but I am my process. Like, I am trying to marry the process, and I'm allowed to be wrong. I'm allowed to talk to someone and at the end of it change my mind without being a hypocrite or without feeling I've lost any part of my self-esteem. In fact, my esteem is really based, part of my esteem is really based on how honest I am with respect to applying reason to situations and being willing to change my mind if it turns out that I'm wrong, or even just declare, I don't know, like with Nixium, for my relationship to Nixium at this point is, I don't know. And I hate to say it, I kind of don't care. Like, it's not, I mean, I care because it affects you and we're friends now, but like, I'm not there. I'm not the person in jail. I'm not the person affected one way or another. If there was injustice, I think that's bad and I think it should be fought. But like, I don't have all the details. I haven't researched it. And there's lots of injustices and things that go on in the world. I don't have to have a detailed opinion about all of them. Like, I don't know. It's okay for me to say, I don't know. I do know people have agency. I do know I've identified some things that are suspect. Okay. From the documentaries, I mean, like some things that are like, I didn't like how that was portrayed and, whatever. But it doesn't really matter. to me personally, and I don't think it should matter to me personally. I don't know if you disagree with that. But
No, I mean, I think, yeah, you touch on something that's been really baffling to me, which is how many people tell me what they think they know about my life and my experience. And just like it's shocking to me that this story has really like captured the imaginations of people to the point where they invest so much time commenting, messaging, saying nasty things, telling us who we are and what we experienced. I just would never do that. I would never ever think to do that. If I saw something about someone and I thought maybe my life experience or my wisdom could be of benefit to them, maybe I would reach out and say like, hey, I'm here for you, maybe. Or hey, like, wow, you're really going through a hard time, I'm sorry, or something. But the audacity and arrogance of people and just the sheer time they have to invest in these things that have nothing to do with them is quite baffling to me. I'd love to talk to one of these people at some point and just understand, like, what is it for you? Because I couldn't even get through the documentaries. Like,
so I think it's a fetish. No, I'm using that word intentionally.
Yeah.
I think it's a fetish. And I think that if sex had not been involved, no one would give a shit.
No one would give a shit. And if the gender roles were reversed, also no one would give a shit.
Yes. In fact, many men would be looking to get into the cult.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, we have talked about this. This is one of those, it is one of these weird things where we have an obsession. So as a culture, we're obsessed with sex, but we have this weird love-hate relationship with it where we have high infidelity, like massive porn consumption. Almost no one, I just looked this up, people that have single sex partners their entire lives, 12% of men and 25% of women. I think that's actually high probably, but those are what people admit to.
What people, right, exactly.
Okay,
yeah.
So like most people not living the be a virgin, get married, stay married to one person, and only have sex with them, in the missionary position for your whole life, and like no one's doing it.
Yeah.
Very few people are. 50 Shades of Grey,
right.
Horribly written piece of crap, but still
so popular.
Very popular.
Very popular.
Super popular. People really interested in anything racy. We were starting to dress up our, preteen singers in outfits that look like they should be walking 42nd Street or whatever. Like we've got that kind of a relationship with it. But the minute there's some kind of something that can be scandalized, and I'm curious about why you guys could be scandalized, but maybe like Charlie Sheen couldn't be or whatever. But like the minute that
it is interesting.
Scandalized, like then suddenly we get very self-righteous and puritanical and like, well, that's a sex cult, blah, 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 they're doing, like, okay, well.
No, I know. It's kind of funny. Like, I wonder if Keith was like a rock star, if people would feel the same way. If it was
Keith Richards, no one would care.
Well, they don't care, clearly, because, I mean, I've heard stories.
Sure.
But, yeah, there's something that really hits a nerve with people about this guy who's, like, seemingly just kind of nerdy, but is able to attract these women. And I think for some men, there's just, like, a deep, repressed feeling of wanting that, but judging that it's not okay or they can't have that, like being with more than one woman.
Is it like the gay conservative guy who's secretly like, he's anti-gay, but he's secretly passing notes in the men's stalls to people?
Right. Like, I don't know. I'm not a man, but I I don't think I'd be going out too far on a limb to say that I think a lot of men would love to have multiple women as
Oh,
partners
I
who
think
are
it's
cool
one of
with
the
it.
biggest fantasies of guys, right? I mean,
Okay.
yeah,
So
I think you can look it up. I think that's one of the most
so
common
how
fantasies.
dare
Yeah.
this nerdy guy get away with it? I mean, clearly he didn't, but um I don't know. I think there's some like complicated suppressed feelings of like what primitively or emotionally feels good versus what is socially acceptable, either to want or to have. And there's a lot to unpack there. And then for the women, like I watched this interview or this live stream discussion where the host actually played part of an interview with me, my Scott Adams interview. And then the men picked it apart, saying that I was victimized, that I didn't really want that I felt badly about it. And
Right.
it's so crazy to me. First of all, like, again, I just would never pretend to know that much about someone I've never met. I've only seen 5 minutes of an interview, which, by the way, was the first interview I'd ever done speaking about something incredibly personal. Before, as an actor, I never talked about my personal life ever. And it's been like put under the microscope. It's been dramatized, scandalized in ways that are like make me blush because that's not me. And so, you know, of course I'm nervous. Of course I'm trying to say the right things, but then they make it into something else. And I think the idea that someone like me would be okay being in a relationship with someone who had other partners was like inconceivable. But I think it comes from a place of like not wanting to accept that could be, or that another man could have that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I
I
don't know
mean,
if
I
I
don't
can
want to
be
go into
unbiased
their
about this.
psychology
No, no,
about
I
these
get it.
things,
Well,
but I'm like, what is going on for them that they just can't accept that I'm a person and that I make choices just like everybody does, and I might actually want to make the choices that I'm making, that I'm not being like abused or brainwashed or like controlled by a man.
yeah, the brainwash. We can circle back to brainwash later. I don't even like it as a word because I think it's. I think it's a word that deprives people of agency generally.
Oh,
Like,
100%.
right? It implies that like, oh, you couldn't help it. You were brainwashed. It's like, no, you made decisions that maybe some people think are stupid. Like
Yeah, and
if you're in
maybe
an actual cult or whatever, right?
right, and maybe there's like outside influences just like there is in any, you know, someone's upbringing, you know, your parents pressure you to go to med school. Like, of course that can exist, but at the end of the day, you're the one making those choices and you're the one who has to live with the effects and take responsibility. And I just believe that that's a better way to live.
Yeah, and it is. I can see the psychological appeal to that some people would have to allowing themselves to be quote brainwashed, right? It's a because you no longer. I think a lot of people are afraid about making decisions for themselves because life is, you have one life, and self ownership is an agency, is a responsibility, and I think some people just don't want that responsibility, and
Mm-hmm.
so I could see giving. I wouldn't do it, but I could see the psychological, and I don't think it's a good idea, but I could see the psychological motivation for giving up that agency and saying like, well, I'm gonna defer, um, and have blind faith in someone or whatever. But
Yeah.
I don't know. When you say, so do you think it is about? Do you think it was just about the? You think it was about envy? Let's not pick on those two guys in particular.
Yeah,
Like,
no, no, no,
forget
not
those people.
no.
Just generally, is this
I
like,
don't
is this
know.
guys saying like, I'm envious of this and I want to be in that position? Is that what it is?
I think it's much more complicated. I think there might be that if you isolated that, but a lot of people assume that Keith abused his power and that's how he was able to have the relationships he had. And I think that's another scary thing for men to try on, because I think we all maybe have had experiences of abusing power intentionally or not in different ways, and it's not a good thing. And so maybe it's a scary thing to connect with, and so it's very important to condemn it.
What does it mean to abuse power?
Oh, this could be a whole
I'm genuinely because I don't think it's obvious.
Yeah. So I think power is earned. And so when you earn power, there is a specific use for which that power is to be applied. That's how because that's how you've earned it.
So like I'm the boss of the factory because I've earned it, and like I'm allowed. I can't tell you what to eat, but I'm allowed to tell you when to show up at work.
Exactly. And you have a specific role. Whoever either promoted you into that position, or you earned it by creating a company of your own and employing the people they trust you to, use your power according to the business and the exchange that you've made with them. And so abusing that power, as you say, would be, overstepping the boundaries of the constraints of your power as it was agreed upon.
So it's a violation of trust that was placed in you in some way, right? Like if I own a shop and I give a manager the keys to the shop, there's an understanding of what the shop's to be used for. He can't then go like make copies of the keys and then have weekend keggers at the store. Like that's an abuse of his power.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what happens when you get to a situation in which, let's just make it nice and triggering. You have a vulnerable, doughy-eyed young woman.
Right.
Maybe a documentary was made about her. I don't know. You have a doughy-eyed, vulnerable young woman, and a man, I don't know, 20 years older. And she looks up to him for some reason, and he wants to start a sexual relationship, and he pressures her, but social pressure, like, pressures her, hey, if you want to keep hanging out with me, you need to do X, Y, and Z. Is that an abuse of power?
I think so. I think if it's, if it's using some sort of social pressure or, it's tough. I mean, because you describe like the doughy-eyed woman.
I'm doing that.
I mean, she has right. No. And I think like I've also, I worked in Hollywood. I've been in situations where directors have made moves. Okay. So I can explicitly speak to this situation, to being in that circumstance and being unsure when they wanted to hang out, if it was professional, which would have been good for my career, or if it was purely sexual interest. And, these are men who are married. So I assumed innocently that mattered. And
plus you're in Hollywood. That's pretty dumb, but okay.
Well, I was in Vancouver, so
okay, fair enough. Maybe in Vancouver you could.
I hadn't been totally corrupted yet. Just kidding. I'm not corrupted, I don't think. No, but I was in those situations, and I walked away. Like I felt very uncomfortable, and I said no, and I walked away. I'm not saying that was easy, but I did it. Right. So I don't know. I can imagine.
Why you're not more famous is what that's the.
Yeah, probably. But I feel like in a very difficult position because I really can empathize with that experience of feeling pressured both to maybe preserve some sort of relationship. But the thing in my mind is like, if it was professional, then they wouldn't be doing that. So clearly it's not. And I didn't want that. Like first of all, I didn't want to earn my way that way. So
Right.
then I think then you don't even feel good with, at least I didn't feel like I would feel good if I like got a role because I, slept with someone.
Right.
But I do empathize with feeling pressured to engage in some way. But I also think women need to take responsibility for what they choose. So I think in general, just the better conversation that we should be having around these situations is, why do women feel so dependent? Why do they feel pressured? Like even when I was I guess like 19 when I first had an experience like that. Like how could I have been more aware, more informed, maybe more resourceful in knowing what was going on? Like to me, it makes more sense to focus on how can we help women grow and be more self-aware, as opposed to and feel okay saying no if it's not something they want, uh, rather than demonizing men and making women default victims. And on top of that, this is where it gets tricky, and this is more my perspective on the Nexium situation, is that women knowingly and enthusiastically chose certain things, and even not just chose them, pursued them proactively.
Okay.
And then later, when they experienced a certain humiliation from like the media starting to say things, or maybe they started to not feel as special as they did in the beginning, or any number of other factors, social pressures, then they changed their mind about the decisions they made. So I know that I'm not trying to speak for anyone else. I think that does happen, and that's where it's an issue, because then how do men know? How do men know if a woman is consenting or not, if she's able to change her mind later and create a whole bunch of effects from that? So I know that's not
Hell
necessarily the
hath no fury,
conversation we
right?
started.
Yeah, no,
Well,
no.
yeah.
I think you tweeted this the other day about, I don't have a son, I have daughters, so but if I did, I know how I'd have responded to that tweet. You tweeted about, hey, people that are raising sons, are you concerned about them being falsely accused or something like that? I'm
Yeah.
paraphrasing, I don't remember. How could you not be, right? I mean, you've seen in universities, you've seen explicit rules that are like, if they're drunk, it's his fault if she regrets it afterwards, right? It's like completely biased,
Yeah.
kind of weird rules that everyone kind of just nods their head and says, yeah, that's the way it is. And it seems like we've got a bunch of women who want to have it both ways. They want to say we're equals and we have agency, which I'm supportive of, but like, we're equals and we have agency, and we need to be taken care of specially. And those two things can't go together. You either get treated like a child,
Yeah.
but don't get the responsibilities of an adult, or you get the responsibilities of adult and you don't get the treatment of a child. You have the full responsibility.
Right.
And that means being able to say no. One of the things that you're touching on that really disappointed me about the Harvey Weinstein thing was like how long. I look at this and I think there's always going to be one or two scumbags, right? Like there's always going to be predators. What allows Harvey to is the number of women who say yes.
Yeah.
If they just all said no, or if only one or two said no, like it wouldn't work, or exposed him, right? And they will say, well, you don't understand. It was power, and my whole career's on the line, and blah blah blah. Okay,
But how does he
but
have that power?
Yeah, that's how he gets it. And
Yeah.
I mean, I look at this as like, I think prostitution should be legal, but if you can't, if you're going to do that, then you've just made yourself a prostitute, and like,
Mhm.
you can't complain about it. It's like, well,
Right.
that's what you decided to do. You made yourself a prostitute. You
Mhm.
can't later complain that it was a problem. Um,
Yeah, I
and yes,
have
he's
the
a vile
same
individual. I'm not,
issue. Right. Well, no, and that's the thing. And going back to kind of our topic of social repugnance, I think when also it goes into like the criminal part, it's very hard for someone like Harvey Weinstein to get a fair trial, because it's just like, who would defend such a monster? You know, how could you question these poor women? There's just like so much prejudice that comes from this hatred and fear, like hatred of people who abuse their power. And a lot of people probably have had personal experiences too, which really like muddy the perception. That's another thing I found, is that people come, you know, they talk to me, and they, if they've ever been in a like narcissistic abusive relationship, they project everything that they went through on me.
Mm.
And I'm like, I'm so sorry that that happened to you. And I genuinely, you know, I feel for anyone who has been through that, but that's not my experience. But they're not open to it. And I think the same thing happens when we see these high profile cases where everyone just like throws all of their baggage of like bad experiences onto this one person, and there's no distinctions.
Yeah, you're depressing me, right? Because
Sorry.
no, it's I'm also thinking of Kavanaugh, who I didn't particularly thought was a great judge or anything, but what a great example
Yeah.
of like taking her at face value. There was no innocent until proven guilty. There was no attempt
Yeah.
at fairness. Really, it was just a lot of looking for stuff, projecting,
Yeah.
um, and
And
it wasn't.
exploiting that genuine empathy
Yeah,
people have for someone who's been abused or sexually assaulted. Like, you know, it's good that we feel
right.
genuine concern for someone who's been through that, but I do believe there are people who take advantage of that for their own political gain or attention or fame or anything. And I don't think that's good.
I want to circle back to something I was saying before. It's difficult. I think it's slightly difficult for me to be objective about the Nixium stuff because I've lived in the Bay Area for over 20 years. The idea that people have open relationships is like I feel like you could flip a coin at the Safeway and you'd run in like that's the probability that you meet someone, flip a coin.
Right.
That's the probability that they'll be in an open relationship
Be
or some sort of
poly or right. Right.
something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I've talked about this on the show in the past, so I don't think I'm TMIing people, but like I've tried poly and other relationships in the past. I made decisions about what worked for me and what didn't work and why, and I actually have arguments about why I don't think some things work generally for certain
Mm-hmm.
goals in life.
Mm-hmm.
They might work for other goals, but so and maybe I relearned some stuff the hard way. But it's not when people are like, well, how could this possibly be going on? It's like, well, where do you live? Like, are you under a rock? Of course, this is
Yeah.
like, yes, there are
Yeah.
people who are comfortable with different
Lifestyle.
sexualities or
Yeah.
lifestyles, I'll say. And the thing that's odd to me is it's not just the conservatives. I could see the conservatives being upset, because there's a very puritanical relationship, but
Mm-hmm.
conservatives have a fetishized relationship with sex generally, I think, but that's a separate issue. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so there's this like maniacal obsession with sex in a way, but they have a particular way of viewing it. but it's also you're also getting criticism from people who are the same people who would say be trans activists and be all about any other kind of alternate sexuality. It's just that particular thing is bad.
Mm-hmm.
And that strikes me as it means that they're not reacting to the sex, they're reacting to something else. I think.
What do you think it is?
I thought it was the sex until I just said it out loud, and now I'm like, it must be something else. I don't know. Right. I assumed it was the sex, but it's got to be.
Some people think it's the branding, and other people have no issue with the brand.
I mean, the branding.
I think it's just a whole. Weird, I think it's a gestalt of, several things taken way out of context during the height of Me Too. I guess. Yeah, and then there's the Bronfman wealth. Like, there's just a lot of things that inspire social repugnance in people.
So you think it's just this confluence of, there's like a perfect storm of stuff.
Kinda, because when I have conversations with people and I try to isolate it, it's hard to figure out exactly what it is, because I can unpack the brand and how it's just like a tattoo. The women knew about it. Like, it's also how it's been portrayed. Like I said, they really did an amazing job. Just for example, with the branding, the cult where women were branded, not where this sorority where women chose to get a brand, just like fraternities. It's just like a tattoo. It's not a cattle brand the way that they have you imagine it. And then in the shows, they put this dark, scary music, and they put animations of shadows, and exactly. And it's absurd, because we were suburban people living totally normal lives and trying to do things that made us stronger, maybe in slightly unconventional ways, but not even close to a lot of things that, like you say, probably happened in San Francisco, I don't know, clubs or whatever. Yeah. Exactly. Like, really not that out there. But I do think it was just painted in such a way, and there was a lot of money and momentum behind the narrative in the media, and the media is really that's who we look to tell us how to feel about stuff.
Yeah, maybe it's the Occam's razor part of me. Like, there's something unsatisfying about the perfect storm explanation, but maybe that's it. I don't know.
I'm trying to see. I haven't really looked at the chat.
We can do.
Let's go branding.
Yeah,
it's really funny.
Datzloff Act Mant Carey says, "Keep fighting and always remember there are 4 lights."
Oh yes, I will always remember. I promise.
Yeah. All right. So okay, we'll go with the perfect storm explanation, I guess. So if it was...
Well, there's another thing too. I mean, I do think people are afraid of possibly like being brainwashed, or like that they could be in a situation where they might be persuaded to do things that they don't want to do. I think that inspires something in people.
So when I saw the documentary and saw the master slave thing, I thought about, like, okay, what's the context in which, again, I tried to approach it a little bit like, all right, I'm going to be open to, like, there's a positive goal here, and what's, what could be going on that's a positive goal. And I came up with some ideas about why people might want to do that and what the goals are. And you and I haven't talked about this, but and I don't think it is actually a good way to accomplish those goals. So I ended up saying, okay, well, I don't like it as a strategy, but I understand the idea behind the strategy, I think. But the branding, the branding is just, I don't know. I think people aren't familiar with the branding. Like they don't realize that kids get branded in sororities or fraternities.
Yeah, I mean, I've received so many messages from people in sororities and fraternities who've watched the show and they're like, "Girl, it like what you guys did was nothing compared to what some of us do." Like they've told me stories that horrify me.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it's got to relate to. I'm going to go back to the sex. It's got to relate to the sex. It's got to be there's got to be something about an ordinary guy like Keith being in that situation. That's got to be what freaks people out.
I think so.
So we and I have talked about this, and it's something that bothers me, and we're breaking this rule with you because your sex life is already somewhat public. Unfortunately, like that's
You're
just,
gonna make me blush. Okay.
I'm not. I mean, we're not going to get further into your sex life. Don't worry.
Okay.
I'm just like, but we've already kind of broken this rule a little bit with you by talking about your sex life. We are in this culture in which we are fascinated with everyone else's sex life, and where we feel comfortable saying, "Oh, are you gay? Are you bi?" Like, like asking questions. Like it's a news story. If someone runs for office and they're gay, that's a news story.
Yeah.
If someone runs for office, and if you were to run for office, this would be clearly a news story. Anyone who is polyamorous running, it would be a news story. Oddly enough, someone on their sixth marriage who cheats all the time would not be a news story. That would be par for the course.
That would be normal.
But we kind of have this expectation that people owe us an explanation of their sexuality when we're not soliciting them. Like if someone came up to me in a bar and was like, "Do you want to go home and have sex?" Like, okay, hopefully that wouldn't be their line, but like, I can then I would understand why there's an expectation that I reveal something about my
Preference.
Sexuality, because they would
Sure.
be like, is that possible?
Yeah.
Or is there compatibility? Yep. But if that's not the context, what's the reason why anyone needs to know? And I told you this, and I'm never going to answer questions about my sexuality because it's no one's business. And I wish that we were in a world in which more people would say, "I'm just not going to answer." Like,
yeah,
like gay, straight, whatever it is, we don't need to be asking. Do we?
Well, that's exactly the pickle that I find myself in, because there are a lot of things that I could share that would clarify different details and maybe make certain things more understandable or relatable, even if people don't agree. But at least it would, I think, diminish a lot of the outrage. And at the same time, like I said, like even if you Google, like before this happened, who's dated who, there's websites like that. Like even when I was in Hollywood, I never made that part of my public life. I really strongly believed that I should be entitled to have a private life. I understand at a certain level of fame that might be impossible, but I wasn't there, and I really valued just having my own life. And separate from even having fame, I never think that it's my business who people sleep with. Like, even like there was a point, I think, when I was just like, when I was younger and I was questioning a lot of things about relationships and the meanings and the labels that we put on them. Like I've always been curious to understand and challenge conventions, not necessarily to defy them, but to understand them. And so someone, family members will be like, so are you dating someone? And in my head, I'd be like, so you want to know if I'm having sex with someone? Like, that's kind of rude, right? But that's like but people don't think that they're saying that. And I know that it's very socially acceptable and it's like what we talk about. But at the end of the day, that's kind of what it's about. Like, oh, are you dating them? Are you just friends? None of your business, really, unless, like you say, you're soliciting. And yeah, as far as the whole gender preference, it's never been something that I've felt the need to identify with, to publicize. And I understand, the history that people have fought to be accepted in society, and I get that. I can just say, for me personally, it's not something that I think has relevance to any part of my life outside of that part.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to play, I was going to say devil's advocate, but actually it's not really devil's advocate because I think it's mostly, I'm going to represent the more Christian viewpoint for a second, or the traditionalist viewpoint. I can see them looking at the world and seeing that it's falling. The Western world's kind of falling apart. We don't have to get into details, but I think most people watching this show are kind of in agreement that things are kind of going the wrong direction, and the Western world is falling apart. And I think there's a traditionalist mindset, which is, well, we need to get back to blankety blank time. And that includes, it's a package deal mindset, right? It includes the sexual mores of the past, as well as some of the other good things about the past. And they are seeing an abuse. I think it's an abuse of sexual freedoms. I think there's a lot of abuse of the sexual freedoms right now. And I don't mean it in like, you're hurting me with your sexual freedoms. I mean, people are hurting themselves. I think there's a lot of self-abuse. I think when the restrictions on sexuality were lifted, I think some people have gone full on hedonism in a way that is actually self-destructive and isn't good for them. And so I could see more traditionalists reacting to this going, well, it's important that we try and stuff everything back in Pandora's box, right? We have to to get control of it again and stuff it back, because things were better then than they are now. So I relate to that, and I guess I'll ask you, just not personally, but just what's your view on? I don't think that we should do that, by the way. I think we should move forward, and I think maybe we were here and we overcorrected, and we should like kind of bounce back and find what actually works and is rational and healthy. I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on that without getting personal?
Sure. Well, I think that's the same thing that happens when you try to enforce anything through fear or violence, is that you create all these kind of repressed impulses that people, now they're not even allowed to acknowledge that they have. And then I think they come out, when they do, in even more unhealthy ways. The thing is, it's easier to control through fear than to inspire people and motivate them to make good decisions, on their own. And I think ideally we would, nurture and educate people in a way that inspired healthy decisions around sex and relationships, as opposed to making them feel shame about their bodies, or making them feel shame about urges, and repressing different things, and not even being able to talk about how they feel, what they desire, and things like that. So it's a more difficult road. It takes more effort on everybody's part. I think it's a more evolved and civilized way to go, but it's harder, and there's less, there's a feeling of more chaos, but otherwise you're just trying to enforce some order, and I think it's in the long run more inevitable that people are going to defy it, which is kind of, I think, what you're alluding to, what's happening now. It's like the pendulum has swung too far, and it's not necessarily good. Like, it's not coming from a self-full place. It's coming from a more like almost like teenage, like, you can't control me, I'll do what I want. But that's
Exactly,
the
yes.
opposite of what
I'm
you're
gonna eat
being
as much
told.
chocolate cake as I want.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
that's
That
not good for
doesn't
you.
exactly. But it's harder to teach your kid about how to eat healthy, and you can't control it as much if you just say, like, you're a bad person if you eat the cake.
Right. And in fact, I know someone who was raised with never any sugar. It was like almost like totally, sweets were completely banned in every way, all the time. But of course, when she grew up and had access to sweets, she had no muscle for moderating sweet consumption, because in reality, they're everywhere. And so once you're an adult, access is like the floodgates are open. And she had a big problem with eating sweets because she had never built up that muscle for, I can have a little bit and then I need to stop. And
right. And finding a reason for oneself that it would be good or bad to make different choices, as opposed to pleasing or displeasing a parent, which is it's a tricky balance as a parent, right? Because you want to instill certain values and habits, but at the same time, you want to give them enough freedom that they develop their own moral compass. And I feel like that's the same in our culture and our civilization. Like, you want to instill certain values, but if you enforce them, then they're no longer that person's values. Then their value is just not being shunned or attacked or judged, right? Their value isn't actually the thing.
I am so glad. I did not expect us to talk about child rearing, but I'm super glad you brought this up, because it's I think it's crucial, and not enough parents listen to this. So not enough parents have that perspective that you just outlined. Many parents seem to think that discipline, like authority, is the answer. We don't do this. Why? Because I said so, or because, or just an arbitrary, because it's wrong. That's not a reason, actually. By the way, you haven't said why it's wrong, right? Or because it's written down here. That introduces a dynamic of your behavior needs to be moderated by an authority figure. That's why you do things. And by the way, that can lead to two outcomes. One, it can lead to rebelling against authority. For a strong-willed person, they end up being a rebel and breaking all those rules intentionally, precisely because they're rules that are arbitrary, at least arbitrary to them, right?
Right.
Or they become really good fodder for a stronger authoritarian to give them more stuff to do later in life. And one thing that when I had my first child, one thing that I vowed never to do was never to say because I told you so. And which sounds like a minor thing, but you realize that actually a lot of times we're not prepared to give reasons. We have things that we do and expect ourselves to do, but we're not prepared to give reasons
for everything. And kids are just like, but why?
They want reasons for everything. Yeah. And that would be another rule I made myself was like, I'll just answer why, like genuinely answer why. And it led to some really interesting. Did it make parenting more difficult at times? I wouldn't say more difficult, but more time consuming at times.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. It takes more effort. Yeah.
Definitely. Sometimes my answer would be like, well, gee, why do we do that? Well, I'd have to think. And sometimes I would have to be like, let me think about it.
Right. And maybe sometimes it doesn't matter. Like maybe you realize that your reason was arbitrarily downloaded to you from your parents or teachers or whatever. And so it's a very valuable circumstance to put yourself in. I feel like
Yeah.
children teach us so much about our
Yes.
own inconsistencies and hypocrisies and things like that. Like they're so pure and they genuinely want to know. And yeah, we don't always know why we do what we do or why
Yeah,
they
and it's a
should do what
beautiful thing.
we want them to. Yeah. Yeah, it
Yeah.
is.
And it's one of the things I love most about having kids. And because if you want them to have a moral compass, if you want them to grow up having an actual moral compass, they need to internalize all of those morals, which means not memorize,
Yeah.
not get accustomed to, but embrace willfully because they
Yeah.
know why.
Yeah.
They have the why themselves. That's the only way that it really sticks.
Yeah.
And
Well, and
yeah,
that again, going back, I feel like this relates to what we were talking about earlier. That is a more uncomfortable place to be. Like it's
yes,
easier to just be told what to do and do it. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, you can just blame the person. Like it's a more vulnerable feeling to really take on the responsibility to make choices knowing that you might fail or might do something that later you regret or
you might be
whatever.
wrong.
It's so right, you might be wrong. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting, like going back to the whole cult thing. I do think there are a lot of people who are attracted to organizations for that reason.
Hmm.
And that's just true. Like that's just human nature. And I do think it's a worthy question to ask, okay, but then whose responsibility is it? Like, is it the leader's responsibility to say, like, no one can listen to me, or like no one no one
Right.
I don't know, like, or test people to make sure that they're not just like looking for a leader to follow. I mean, it's hard because so many people are like that. And I'm sure that like that's kind of the journey of just getting older. Like as you grow up, you look for different people to mimic or live. You like how you think they live, so you're like, okay, I'll be like them. Or maybe you want acceptance from someone, so that's kind of just life until you really, in my case, it just took losing absolutely everything and facing my biggest fears to be like, okay, it's just me. So what do
Right.
I want to do? What do
What do I
I
want?
care about?
Yeah.
And it's really not that different than what I've always done, but I feel very differently about it.
There are a lot of people that will give lip service to freedom. They'll pay lip service to freedom and independence. But the minute you talk about the other side of that coin, the necessary, like it not making it up, like these come together. The necessary other side of that coin, which is
Yeah.
responsibility,
Responsibility. Yeah.
they really don't like
100%.
it.
Yeah.
Because getting back to you're talking about the sexual mores. The ugly truth is we probably don't know what's right in a whole bunch of areas, like what works best. Like it's messy and ugly, and
Mhm.
it's like we have a responsibility to figure it out, and it's a scary, messy, ugly thing, right?
Mhm.
And it's much easier to do one extreme or the other. Well, has to be this way. That's the only way. That's what's written down. So that's what we do. Or you can do anything. Those are very easy because they don't
Mhm.
require thinking. They just
Mhm.
require
Mhm.
doing
Right.
or obedience.
Well, can
But
I ask
thinking's
you,
hard. Yeah, go ahead.
when you say it's a scary, messy, ugly thing, like what are you referring to?
Well, maybe I'm projecting, but I'm dealing with this in particular because I have a daughter who's 12, right? And so it's getting to the point where okay, soon there's going to be more and
Yeah,
more
yeah.
discussions
Like,
about stuff, and the question is like, well, I don't want to say what is right, uh, because I'm not. I do mean what is right, but I mean it
well,
from a
maybe
very
like
like
what is
rational self-interest way. Like what's in your
optimal
best? Yeah.
Right. No, I
Mhm.
understand that. I just like it stood out to me because another thing that I think contributes to our disgust reaction to anything that falls outside social norms sexually is that we're taught that a lot of things about it are ugly and bad and
Oh,
shameful.
I don't
Like
mean that.
especially,
Yeah.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
right. I know you mean like
I mean, the problem
complicated.
itself is a
Yes.
complicated, ugly
Yeah,
problem, not
that's how I
not the
understood it.
stuff.
It just
Yeah,
triggered
yeah,
that thought in my
yeah.
mind, and I think it's unfortunate that we do that. I feel like little boys especially are like taught to feel that they're dirty, and then of course women, if they like sex, are taught to believe that they're slutty or that's
Right.
somehow shameful. But then on the other side, there's like this notion that women should be able to do whatever they want, but it's incongruous. Like it doesn't,
Right.
our culture doesn't support a really like no, that's not the right word, autonomous,
Like
like healthy view of
right.
humans relating in a sexual way. We're very, I think, immature about it.
Yeah.
And I think there's probably reasons that are reasons that benefit certain powers or like religious structures and things, and then there are reasons that just have to do with the human condition, and that is just like
Right.
complicated, and we haven't done enough, I guess, like introspection to really understand it all, again because there's so much taboo and shame around it.
Yeah, it's hard because we can't have we're not even allowed to have the conversation to solve the problems of figuring out
Exactly.
what's optimal because it's
Exactly.
and there's a lot of inertia, right? There's a lot of cultural inertia there, and um so some of the views are based on stuff that's just old, right? And
Yep.
made sense in a different time, maybe,
Yeah.
when the dynamic between spouses was different, and like you had 13 children and 5 of which
Well, and it had to
died
do
after,
with like
you know,
right, and like
a
property
year.
rights, and
Right.
different relationships had um yeah, very practical applications. But I'm coming from the place, like it's funny to me because sex itself has never been a topic I've been particularly interested in discussing, certainly not publicly. But I come from the
Sure.
place of wanting and feeling it very important to talk about anything, and particularly I want to talk about things that make me uncomfortable. And like there's
Yeah.
topics, there's conversations around sex that make me super uncomfortable. But I think that's good because then if I figure out where that discomfort comes from, there is a certain freedom on the other side of it. And it doesn't mean that I'm going to change my position or my opinion on what's good or bad or what I might choose personally. But at least I'm not avoiding it because I'm uncomfortable. And that's really like, I think it's a very personal thing. I have no soapbox when it comes to sex or how people should, you know, handle it or do it or whatever. But
Right.
I believe that if certain things make you uncomfortable, it's worthy to explore where that comes from so that at least you can feel more whole in yourself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually am super uncomfortable talking about this, especially on air. But I
I know.
but I think it needs to
Even
be
though we're not really
discussed.
even talking about, I mean,
It's not even,
anything
yeah.
specific. But it is. It's a funny thing. And I have to wonder, like, yeah, where did that come from? I feel like somewhere along the line, some powers stood to gain from us feeling so uncomfortable, even just talking about sex.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know where it came from in my life. Those powers were my
Right.
parents. But
Sure.
I don't know. But I don't know
Yeah.
where it came. But they
How
got it
it
from
was
somewhere. Right? Like,
passed
yeah, there's
on
something
through
bigger.
the
Yeah.
ages. Absolutely. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I also want to say, like, I've seen the pages from like the books that are supposedly in schools that are sexually explicit. I don't think that's the answer. either. I just want to put that out there. Like I don't
Right.
I think, you know, I think there's a time and a place for people coming to learn certain things, and I don't think it's in public school, and certainly not at a young age. So, but as
Yeah, I
adults,
mean,
I think we should be able to talk.
yeah, no, I agree, and I think there's definitely a movement in society right now to uh, portray sex as consequence free, um, psychologically, physically, and every other way consequence free. And the minute that you start to say, well, you could do that, but there's another side to this equation, and it could lead to this and this and this, and
Mhm.
this is how it could affect you, and blah blah blah. No one wants like
Then you're
you're
being
immediately thrown in the
oppressive.
category of like, oh, now you're an oppressive. Yeah,
Well,
now you're
that's
oppressive, right?
going back to what you were saying about freedom and responsibility. I think a lot of people have a confusion around freedom as a feeling, and it feels like freedom from responsibility. I actually think freedom is the opposite. I think true freedom is committing and fully, like, having the freedom and ability to honor your commitments and your values and not be guided by your emotional or physical whims. To me, that's real freedom, that you can, have character and stand for something, as opposed to just like being guided by whatever you feel in the moment, and mistakenly believing there are no consequences.
Yeah, I mean, when people use the word freedom, like it's one of those words, like all value judgment words. There's usually parts of the sentence that are missing. So it turns it into this floating abstraction that just kind of doesn't relate to anything. So when I think of the word freedom, like it implies it needs to be freedom from something or freedom to do something. Like absent those, it's actually kind of a meaningless thing to talk about. Uh, and I think what we're dealing with is a lot of people who want freedom from the consequences of reality to
Right.
do things, which is like,
Right.
actually, that's not like freedom isn't good. That's not a, people are like, oh, I want freedom. That's not,
Right.
freedom isn't good because, first of all, it needs the other part. Freedom from what, right?
Right.
And if the from what is from facing the consequences of reality, then like that's actually impossible and you shouldn't be seeking it because it will just destroy you. Like that's a bad idea.
Yeah.
You can't escape the consequences of reality. But what you're talking about, you're like, oh, you're talking specifically about, oh, well, I want the freedom to be able to live, be my best self or whatever it is. Okay, that actually does require discipline and responsibility. And like, oh,
Yeah.
to get that, you have to do these other things.
Hmm.
Um, and it would be nice if people clarified what they're talking about when they use freedom, but a lot of times they just use freedom in this kind of vague sense, and then it gets misused. And people on one side take it to mean I should have Second Amendment rights. On another side, they take it to mean I should be able to sleep with everyone in the world and no one should ever judge me, and there should be no negative consequences, and I should get like all the time off I want in the world to deal with any babies,
Hmm.
and free abortions. Like that's freedom. It's like, okay, that's a lot of freedom. Like
Right.
they're just
Right.
vastly different ways of using this word. So, um, yeah, I lost my train of thought. Oh, you know what? You also were reminding me something you said earlier. Reminded me of Japan. Have you been to Japan
I
at
haven't.
all?
No.
So Japan, admittedly it's been like 15 years since, but I spent a while in Japan, and their sexuality is really funny because they were much more. I think like feudal Japan was, they had mores, but they were much more open about. They weren't very prude, right? They were much more open about
Okay.
sexuality and whatever. Like there's octopus porn from old dynasties. Like they were
Okay.
not so prude. And
Hmm.
post World War II, of course, America had a huge influence on their government and rules and laws, and wrote a bunch of rules. And one of the things that they did was they had anti-pornography laws, which is why if people see like pixelation on, that's why it's there. It's illegal. Um, And I often think that what they did culturally was squeeze a balloon in Japan. And they're like, we're going to clamp down on this thing you guys are doing. And what happened over time was you started getting weird, I'm calling them weird,
Mhm.
odd, strange sexual fetishes
Right.
pop out because they squeezed the balloon here, but there's all this like pent up pressure now, and the culture, people in culture can't express themselves that way, so they invent these other kind of weird things. And I don't want to get into all the weird things in Japan, but like
Well, I
you could be on a
remember in high
subway,
school, like the panty vending machines. That's why I remember hearing
panty
about. I don't know
vending
if that's an urban myth.
machines.
No, that's real.
No,
Okay.
that's real.
Okay.
Yeah, panty vending. You can be on a subway and like there can be a guy next to you, like going to work, reading like a porn magazine featuring rape scenes and stuff. It's just
Oh my
like
God.
weird, like a weird relationship with sex. The culture's just, and
Yeah.
I'm not an expert on feudal Japan. I don't know what the relationship
Yeah, yeah,
exactly
yeah.
was, but it seems like there's been this like squeezing of the balloon here, and then like boop, these other parts popped out, and like okay, this
Mhm.
is how we're gonna react. Um,
Mhm.
and what we might be seeing is, you know, America did have a very repressive relationship with sexuality for a long time, and we might just be seeing like their reaction to that, which is like,
Mhm.
okay, now we're going hog wild, um,
Mhm.
and maybe we need to find a balance. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, I feel like there is the hog wildness, but then there's also the opposite, like all the
Mm-hmm.
um like I believe I've read statistics that young people are having less and less sex.
Yes.
Like um I don't know. I think we're very confused. I think there's a lot of mixed messages. I think with media and culture wars and different things, there's a lot of inconsistencies and mixed messages, even more so than I probably when we were growing up. And
Yeah.
it's a lot. It's a lot to unpack. Like there are many threads we could probably pull
Yeah. This
to
is very
kind of
complex subject.
explore. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm certainly no expert, but I do, like I said, like my kind of interest in all of it is separate from the content, is just like anything that we are taught to feel uncomfortable about, or that it's taboo, or that it's socially unacceptable. I To me, that's kind of a red flag and something that should be further examined. um,
Yeah.
and yeah, I think that our culture is like more and more even disallowing that type of conversation or inquiry.
Yeah, but like everything, I feel like it's polarized, right? Because there's a part of the culture that's like, how dare you question my hedonism? And then there's
Hmm.
the other part that's like, how dare you even consider any kind of thing
Hmm.
outside this norm? It's like,
Hmm.
which does prevent a conversation as much as the left and right can't have a conversation. It's the same kind of
Hmm.
mechanism at play.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, and I think
yeah.
it's scary, like kind of with how we began the conversation of there's so much judgment and prejudice. So even to have a conversation, like there's things I've said during this conversation, for example, that maybe if I had had time and I was like writing a paper, I would say them differently. I'm saying like the thoughts that come to my head, and probably people will take them out of context and I'll be attacked for it.
Right.
And that, I think, is the biggest reason why most people don't want to have conversations, because you're not even allowed to explore an issue or kind of say something that later you can say, actually, you know what? I'm rethinking what you said, because in the moment I said this, but actually now that I've thought about it more, I have a more refined
Mm-hmm.
opinion. And I understand why people are afraid, because it's just so easy to be attacked, and with social media, it's so easy for it to be spread to the world. I'm sure
Right.
you
Out of
have more
context.
out of context, or even like maybe you said something but it just like came out wrong, and like it wasn't what you
Right.
meant. Like there's no benefit of the doubt. There's no humanity in this, where it's like we can assume that the other person, there's some like good faith that we're trying to understand something better together, or trying to understand each other's position better. And it might be, like you said, like what you were actually saying, like the ugly, messy, scary, like that
Right.
is part of it. I think that's part of communication. So yeah, I would hope that by you having these types of conversations and discussing these topics, and I hope to more also, it can inspire more of that in people, and know that like you can make mistakes. You can think things through out loud. Sometimes that's what it takes. And just understand that like we're all human, and being human is hard, and it's complicated, and you don't always have all the answers, and sometimes you don't know what you think until you're in a certain situation.
Yeah. It's weird because like I mean we're speaking extemporaneously, and that's actually incredibly difficult to do that and be precise in language. It's not I don't think it's actually possible to do all the time and be absolutely precise, right?
Yeah.
That's why word processors have a delete key and you can change some stuff. Right? That's why you do that. So yeah, it is tough because there's this. I think this. I guess I don't want to psychologize about people, but I guess I will. There's this need to tear down other people for like, oh, you said this. I'm going to take it out of context or interpret it in the worst possible way. I'm not going to pretend that I'm not going to understand. I'm going to pretend that I don't understand that you're in the middle of a conversation with context, nuance, it's extemporaneous. You might have misspoken. You might have not been very clear. You might have not thought that through completely. What I'm going to do is take what you've said and I'm going to interpret it in the worst possible way, and I'm going to demonstrate. I'm going to use it as proof that you're somehow an evil, horrible person who wants to eat babies or whatever it is. And it's like, all right, well,
Exactly.
that's. I think that's driven by fear of these conversations. I think it's driven by the fact that having a conversation that's messy like this it can challenge. Things can get said that like might challenge what someone's thinking, and they don't want that challenge, and they just want it to go away. It's an uncomfortable subject. They just want it to go away. They want us to shut up. So this is how they'll get us to shut up. And I don't think we've said anything particularly controversial today. But
No, I don't think so either. I think there's maybe a couple people who don't want to hear what I have to say, but that's fine.
That's right. That happens. We talked about that at the
It's
beginning.
very
They're
meta.
like, oh,
It's
she's
very,
just above it. So,
yeah, exactly. No, it's funny.
Yeah.
But there, I mean, taking it out of, sorry, did you have a direction?
No, go.
Well, I just think there are a lot of other examples of this, like, kind of tokenized emotional reaction people have to different things. On the right, it's like MAGA. If someone's MAGA, they're like, oh, like I don't even see them. If I'm more left leaning, I don't even see them as a person. And then on the other side, it's like, oh, if they have colored hair and piercings and they have different pronouns, then they're like, evil. Like there's just there are a lot of things I feel like in our culture right now that are just so triggering for people, that there's no ability to critically evaluate or connect with kind of the humanity of the other person and try to understand like what that is. And the result is that it just becomes more and more extreme and further and further apart. And so I think kind of the process that we're talking about of understanding like what is it is the most important thing we can do. Like, what is it about a MAGA person that is so offensive? What is it about a person that uses certain pronouns and has colored hair and piercings that is so offensive to a conservative's sensibility? And I know I'm just generalizing
No,
as an example.
yeah.
I'm not saying that's true for anyone on either side, but I think understanding like what is it threatening? Because at the end, to shut down like that, to need to objectify the person, it must be threatening something inside the person. And I think that's kind of what we need to think about.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe that's just generally good advice for like, if you don't want to be reacting emotionally, and you want to be engaging your critical faculties, practicing being able to recognize when you can't suppress your emotions. So that's a futile,
right, and
ultimately
we all
defeatist
have
thing to try.
prejudicial biases too. Like that's
Right.
the bias is not inherently bad. It's very human and natural. It's then what you do with that and like how you
Right.
act on that or not.
Right. So being able to say, "Oh, I'm feeling this reaction to this person," and being able to say, "Okay, well, why?"
Yeah.
And break that down, I think is probably necessary in order to be able to then engage your rational mind instead of just your emotions.
Do you sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Do you know Ram Dass? It's related, not exactly the same, but do you know Ram Dass? He's a spiritual leader in his own right. He was actually a Harvard professor, and he became really quite known in the 60s for going to India and studying under a guru and coming back to the US. He did a lot of like experimenting with psychedelics and bringing Eastern teachings to America. And I find his teachings fascinating, and he's very just like, because he comes from an academic background and he's Jewish, but he studied all religions. He's just very relatable, and I find him really funny. But he said that for a while he put a picture of Donald Trump. I hope I'm saying this correctly, but that he put a picture of Donald Trump on his altar because it was like the most kind of it triggered him, right? And so like to be able to feel, love and kindness towards this person who I guess in his view like epitomized things that he didn't like was the goal. And I think that's cool. Like I think we should do that more, is like challenge ourselves that way, as opposed to just continuing to stay in our echo chambers and affirm what we already think and believe at the expense of the humanity of people we don't like or that make us uncomfortable.
Yeah. I mean, you're reminding me that I'm forming this thought as we go. I haven't thought, like, I think a lot of people are conflating. So when I think about ethics or morals, I kind of put them in two different categories. I don't know if this is like an official thing that other people have done, or if I'm just weird. But one category is like ethics that relates to that are social, like how you should treat other people, right? Like, don't hit them and take their stuff. This is a pretty clear, like, okay, those are some things you should, like, that's a rule.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good rule.
Mm-hmm.
And those I think those you can, I would say, more forcefully argue for and like demand from society. Like, this is the direction we should move. We shouldn't be doing these bad things to each other. But then there's a different set. There's an additional set of morals which are often less clear, which relates just to, and I don't even know if morals is the right word, but I think probably it is. That relates to what's the best way for you to optimize your life and live. Like, is snorting cocaine every day self-destructive? Like, should you force someone else to not snort cocaine every day? No. But should you be snorting cocaine every day? Probably not, unless, I don't know, if you have a day to live, maybe, sure. But like,
Mhm.
are there are
Mhm.
there are there are sets of things that matter to your well-being over the long term, and I think that we're often conflating these things. And so when someone looks at uh you brought up the person with like colored hair and metal bits in their face or whatever, right? I think when someone looks at a person like that, um there's two things that are conflated. Like, on the one hand, that person represents this sort of oppressive authoritarian culture of you must use my pronouns, blah 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 blah, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And so like having a negative reaction to that, even though that person might not believe that at all, that's just like,
Right,
there's a
right. But
representative there
that's
that,
the
like, oh,
assumption.
they're making me
Mhm.
think of that, right?
Mhm.
But if you believe that whatever they're doing is also just bad for them,
Mm.
like if you think that they're making poor choices, that's not something that you attack someone over. That's something that you say, like, if you were making poor choices, I wouldn't be screaming about you on the internet. I would call you up and be like, Nikki, I don't think
Right.
this is a good idea. This is why I don't think it's a good idea. I care
Yeah.
about you. You shouldn't be doing this. Let me try and show you why this is a bad choice. Right. Um, but we're kind of lumping those two things together. And when we see someone making choices that we think are not optimal for them, maybe just not optimal for humans generally, we have this kind of like righteous anger as if they're hurting other people and doing something that's like bad for all of us, when in fact
Mhm.
they're just not living their life in a way that you think is optimal. And you might be right. Maybe they aren't. Maybe
Right.
they need
Right.
help. But
Mhm.
that's not the same thing as them being uh, the aggressor that needs to be beaten down. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's a difference between, you know, there's rights, and supposedly we live in a society where people have the right to live their lives however they want within the constraints of the law. Um, but people do get offended and triggered by differences that they see, and become more of like the morality police, as
Right.
opposed to just like you say, like from a caring place. I mean, it's a good thought experiment for people to think, like, if this was a relative, like, how would you handle it? If it was your
Right.
child, how would you handle it? Would you berate them? Would you excommunicate them? Or would you talk to them about their choices, why they're making them, maybe how they could make better choices? I'm not saying it's that simple.
No, but
I've
that's a good
had
starting
family
point.
members who have had addiction problems, and it's not as simple as just having a conversation, but I don't think anger and hate is ever the solution. And it is an interesting, it's something that I've experienced directly, where it's kind of funny, like, if people do really think that I was in a cult and I was like a victim,
Right.
they then they're like additionally victimizing me. Like,
Right. They're
I'm
abusing you
being
further.
punished, they're abusing me
Right.
further
Yeah.
for not realizing how I was abused.
Right. Right.
And
It's
it's
like
it's
they
curious.
yeah, I love that, because it's like they roll up to your house, they think that your husband is beating you, so they pull you outside by the arm and smack you until you
So
get it.
until you get
It's
it,
like
that
it's
exactly.
like, oh,
That
that's
wake
not
up,
helpful.
no,
Yeah.
it's really not. And it's violent, and
Right.
has all sorts of um, you know, has a very presumptuous nature on so many levels. But it I don't know. I guess it's again, it goes back to, like, yeah, do they really care about those things, or is it just about them feeling okay? And I think that
Right. The
them
latter.
feeling comfortable, like, I just want everyone to fit into the box that I've had to fit in my whole life. So no one else should be able to go outside of it and enjoy their lives. Like, I think that's kind of a thing as well.
Yep.
So yeah, I do think that's something people become if they felt oppressed, I guess this is I believe this is like a theory in social psychology. I don't know exactly what it's called, but like, if you followed a bunch of rules, then when you see people breaking them, like, you become the authoritarian. Like, you may hate
yes.
it that
Yes.
you are being oppressed in this way, but you can't stand seeing other people kind of like get away with things.
Away with it.
And I know that there's like, they talk about how they do this, I think, in prisons and in the military, where they start like pitting people against each other to get control, like give someone a little bit of power and then they oppress the others.
Yes. Well, there's this famous Stanford prison experiment there as well. And I think that trait is related to the kind of flip side of that, which is if you had an unhealthy lifestyle in some way, let's say drinking or smoking or whatever, and you quit that, the people around you that are continuing in that unhealthy lifestyle really hate that you quit it and try and pull you back into it. And that's the same kind of phenomenon. They don't like that you got out. They don't like that. It's like the crabs pulling each other down in the bucket, right? You're getting out, and they don't like that because it represents, just like breaking the rules, it represents, well, if they can break the rules, then I could break the rules, and I'm not.
I could,
or
but
if
I'm
they
scared
can stop doing
to.
this,
Right.
I could stop doing this, but I'm not. And like
exactly.
it focuses the light internally on a failure of theirs.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't feel that way, actually, if they didn't want that thing, right? So if someone was like, well, I quit eating steak, I would not be like, you jerk. Like, I don't want to quit eating steak. I don't feel bad about eating steak. I feel great about eating steak. So I wouldn't feel the need to claw you back, right? But, but if it was something that I actually felt guilty about that I was doing, then I'm more likely to want to react in that way. So I guess we're now psychologizing all the people that are criticizing.
No, but I think it applies to a lot. I mean, I've experienced it. Like, I've been vegan for I don't know, like 15 years. So I've experienced all the different reactions. Now it's way more common, but like the different reactions people have, and like have been kind of like mean about it, and to the point where I don't normally tell people, unless, again, it's kind of like sex, unless we're having dinner. It's not relevant.
I can't have the steak, Carter.
Yeah, well, no, and you can. That's the thing. Like,
no, but I mean, like, you could. You'd have to say.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Or about like losing weight or getting fitter. Sometimes people have really bad reactions to that because it triggers their. And I'm not saying this is true for everyone, but I do think that's something that exists, and I think it's in our culture again. And I don't know how widespread this is, because I do feel like I'm definitely informed a lot by Twitter, and I know that that's not a significant representation of the entire population. But in terms of like the discourse that happens on Twitter and in general media, like the way that we can't seem to talk about what is potentially optimal, healthy, normal, without shaming people who aren't that. Like, I don't think that it's one or the other. Like, I don't think that talking about being healthy and that like being thinner is healthier. Like, if you look at people in their 80s and 90s, they're skinny for the most part. Like, there's a longevity factor to it, and it's not a judgment. It's just a reality. And it's good to promote acceptance, but not to promote destructive or unhealthy things. And I know there can be unhealthy things psychologically and emotionally too. So it's again, it's like a whole can of worms, and it's complex, but I feel like we're so quick to polarize and make conclusions about things that aren't saying that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you care about someone, part of your responsibility is to hold up a mirror for reality back to them so that they can see. Like, the analogy I'll use is like, if I despise someone and they smile and they have some like lettuce in their teeth and they're about to go into a meeting, maybe I'll let them go. But if I
Right.
care about them, I'll be like,
Yes.
dude,
Hey, dude. Yeah, of
take the
course.
lettuce out of your teeth, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
and so it's that same kind of thing. If you care about someone, let's say let's say it is a health issue or whatever, you reflect back to them gently and nicely, but you reflect back to them like, look, this is the reality,
Hmm.
and you just need to know the reality.
Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, all right. Let's do a couple super chats and then I should go because this has been super long.
Yeah.
This conversation, by
Is
the
this
way, did not go the
how long do
direction I
you
thought at
I
all.
know. There are so many things that I thought about in preparation that we
Me
haven't
too.
talked about at all,
We
but
just didn't do it.
another
That's right.
time.
But I'm having this feeling of everything being connected now because I feel like we have laid out several dozen loose ends for things
Yes.
that are related to one another, and there's lots of different things we could pick on, but we'll never end if we do that. So, um, let me
Hopefully
pull up
we'll
a
be able
couple
to
super
sleep
chats.
tonight,
Well, you
Trying to
might.
close
Good
all
luck for you.
those. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, you're not anyway. Right.
We just have a couple to do. Amoral pancake. I like amoral pancake.
Hmm.
Says Sigmund Freud has a lot to say about the subconscious and repressed libido. Is there something to that, and does it explain asexuals? I don't know what he says about it, so I can't.
I don't. Well, yeah. I mean, I just know the more like pop psychology version of Freud in terms of, um, repressed sexual desires coming out in your psyche. But I do think, I don't know, I know it's not exactly a question, but I do think that our issues around sex, or like the things that we repress, come out in ways that we don't even realize, like just in terms of relationships and in terms of um, social trends. And I do think that Freud's definitely onto something there. I don't know if I agree with like his whole theory, but I do think it's more relevant to our social evolution than we care to realize. But I don't have anything necessarily specific to say about that. And asexuals are people with no sex? Is that like who don't have
I
sex? Is
think,
that
yeah, I think there are people who are uninterested in sex, and interestingly enough, I think there's that is a problem in Japan right now. They're worried about
I
being able
heard
to
about
replace the
that.
population.
Right,
Since
right.
we talked about Japan earlier,
Yeah,
um,
I do
that's where it
remember reading
goes,
about that. Hmm.
right? And you actually said that young people are having less sex now. Maybe that trend will continue, and maybe it's related to
Yeah.
some of the other stuff happening culturally.
I think it's that. I also think the consent conversation is very there's a fear mongering aspect to
Very
it.
not hot in any way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, no, I mean, seriously, like, I
Yeah.
can't imagine being a high school kid and be like, can I do this? Can I do that? Can I do this? Like, I don't know.
Yeah. Sign here. Yep.
Woohoo. That was a super hot date.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and I am gonna just throw this out about the sexual drive and libido. Uh, and I don't know how to apply this to homosexuality at all. So sorry, I can't. I can only. But I do know that there's been a lot of research into the masculine feminine dynamic, and specifically when people look at like how do you keep relationships alive or how do you like do that kind of thing. And one thing that happens is as people become more androgynous, the attractive level goes down between them generally. So um, you generally have one of the things that keeps that spark alive is difference. Difference as such is attractive, right?
Hmm.
And so a lot of times like a married couple will get together and they won't spend any time apart from each other at all, and so they'll kind of merge into this one
Right.
blob of an entity together, and their drive goes down because they don't it's hard to find yourself attractive, right? It's like you're kind
Right.
of this one big entity,
What if you're a
right?
narcissist? But then no, I'm
Then
just
maybe it
joking.
works fine.
Maybe it
Yeah.
works.
Then maybe it's fine. You're like, we are awesome.
I'm awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. But you know, one of the corrective things that therapists will tell you to do is like separate in some way. Like, oh,
Yeah.
you take Saturday afternoons for yourself. You go take that pottery class or whatever you used to do before.
Right.
Like, because you fell in love with that person as a separate individual.
Entity.
And
Yeah.
and that's where that kind of dynamic comes from. So I don't know if that's related, but I imagine a world in which we're all being told that there is no, like, gender is a social construct, masculinity is toxic. We're kind of just as a culture, as we kind of become more androgynous, I can imagine the cultural libido subsiding. But I'm just talking out my ass.
You heard it here first, folks.
Right, there you go.
Yeah,
I'll
no,
fight
that's
you
a whole
naked,
other
says-
conversation, right? Oh,
It is.
someone will fight.
It is.
Who naked?
No,
You
I'll
naked?
fight you naked. That's this person's username. He's in chat.
Oh, okay.
I'll fight you naked says, I think I just made a Trojan horse. It's my pinned tweet. Look carefully. I don't even know your Twitter, man. Maybe I do. I'm gonna do this during the thing. Oh yeah, I do. There's your Twitter. Your pinned tweet. We're gonna look at the pinned tweet. Do I even get this? I hate when I just don't get it. I don't get it. Don't give away the joke. Behold the golden calf of religion. Who is that?
What does it say?
All right, I'm gonna have to show you this because I don't know. I can't. I need your help. Do you get this?
The tweet. Don't give away the joke. Right.
Here, I'll full screen it.
The calf of the woke religion.
Is that George Floyd?
Yeah, I think that's the statue in Union Square.
Well, don't worry about giving away the joke.
Well, I forget what it was. What we were talking about. I feel like because I know that was he wrote that a while ago.
Yeah, it might have been related to.
But what does a golden calf refer to? I'm not familiar enough with the.
Well, a golden calf in biblical terms, right? The golden calf is what the Jews went and worshipped a golden calf instead of God and got themselves in trouble.
Right.
So it's the representative of false gods, right?
Okay. Well, that I guess I get that. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'll fight you naked.
Well,
that was a little bit of a dud, but not intentionally.
But it's okay. We can still be friends. Like that's allowed. You're allowed to.
No, actually, now you're kicked off the channel,
right?
And you're. We've proven you're a horrible person at this point. Imaginary person writes ball. Yes, the false idol was ball. BAAL. All right. I should. It's been 2 hours. I usually only do like an hour and a little bit more, so we just rocked it.
Yeah, we did.
It was it was fun. I did not expect the conversation to go the way it did, but it was still fun.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. So they can follow me on Twitter at Nikki Klein. It's spelled CLYNE. It's actually Scottish. Or on my locals, nikkiklein.locals.com. Or Instagram. I've been posting more on Instagram lately. So trying to up my followers there.
Just your meals or anything good on Instagram?
What's that? Just no meals. Just like fun stuff. I'm starting to do like a little, I posted about this. It used to be just like, kind of abstract photos, but I'm posting more stories about my thoughts on things and stuff. And my fun adventures. Like I went out on Halloween with Colin Wright, who we were just talking about.
Oh, you went out with Colin on Halloween?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We had some funny pictures from that.
Wait, is he in New York?
No, we actually both happened to be in Miami. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Colin's awesome.
Yeah.
I should have him back on the show.
So awesome. Yeah, you should.
He's the one that explained to me. He explained some cool evolutionary stuff to me about how it's actually easier to evolve a change in behavior than it is to evolve a physical manifestation. So, which I thought was super cool. Yeah, he's a good guy. So
yeah, well,
all right,
he'd be a good person to talk about kind of some of the stuff we were talking about and your theories too.
Yeah. It's been like 2 years since I talked to him, so I should reach out again. All right. Well, everyone, as a reminder, I always love suggestions, feedback, topics. I know some of you wrote topics that you want me to address, but I haven't had time to do that, but I will. Also, a reminder, subscribing is mandatory. Special thanks to everyone who supports us financially. Go to unsafespace.com to do that. Nikki, thank you again.
Thank you for having me.
You'll be back. I'm sure you'll be.
Yeah, well, there's so many open loops. So
there's lots of open loops.
The Open Loops podcast, yeah.
All right, take care.
Awesome. Have a great night. Get some sleep. Bye, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.
Hey.
Thanks for watching. If you're new to the channel, we have a deep content library that includes interviews with everyone from Mike Cernovich to Megan Murphy, so go check it out. If you'd like to see more, please consider supporting the show by visiting unsafespace.com/donate. You can find us on all the major social media platforms, at least for now, and you can find a community of like-minded individuals on our Unsafe Space chat on Telegram. See you there.
Warning. This is an unsafe space. Dangerous ideas have been detected. The content of this production has not been authorized by the Cathedral. Pay no attention to it. For your protection, the following co-conspirators have been unpersoned and scheduled for ideological vaccination. To avoid cancellation, please update your ideological contact tracing app on your smart device immediately. Here's a fun fact. Only vaccinated Black Lives Matter. If you think about it, no one should be allowed to express opinions. But don't. Think about it, I mean. That's not your job. Thinking has been scientifically proven to be less efficient than compliance. Science, scientific, and scientifically are registered trademarks of the World Economic Forum. Unauthorized use is prohibited. Computer voice courtesy. Never mind, that last line is fake news. Please disregard it and return to your safe space immediately. There will be cake.